And one thing that we just have to get better at on the left, and by left, I mean people who want to see the end of this dictatorship of the bosses and the rich over all of society, from politics to the workplace. One thing we have to get better at is breaking out of this nonsensical and these nonsensical and emotional categories that divide working people in this country. Look, um, the Biden administration is letting COVID funding expire for the expansion of food stamps and Medicaid expansion, right? And that's going to mean for millions and millions of people lost to access to food, to payments that have been helping people get by. And for people like me, like I come up from poor working class family in this country, right? These were programs that fed me, that cared for me, that made me able to live and survive. So it's very close to home when I see these attacks on them, meaning for millions of people that they're going to have to find that they're going to be struggling, that they're going to be kicked off of their healthcare, that they won't have access to these necessary programs that feed and help rear people. The GOP has certainly been pushing it, and certainly in states like Texas, that means millions of people are under threat of losing healthcare, including kids. But it's not just Texas, it's all across this country. And what I wanted to talk to folks about today is this idea that, like, the left, and I'm talking about democratic socialists and progressives, have to get out of this kind of like red versus blue mentality that is so goddamn popular. And a lot of people just can't shake it. It's just so fundamental to the way a lot of people view politics. And if you're somebody who believes that what we should be doing is building working class power, you got to drop that shit at the door, because we have a very different perspective on politics than your typical like MSNBC watcher, than your Democratic Party consultant, and certainly the entirety of the Republican Party, right? So we're talking about this onslaught of pain for working people across this country. And whenever you see these examples of suffering, like what's happening in East Palestine, what has happened in Alabama with the end of the war met coal strike, all across the country, whenever there seems to be a disaster or a problem or a difficulty in a quote unquote red state or a red area, you get all these people, this cacophony of sound saying like, well, those people should stop voting against their interests and start supporting the right people so they don't fall into this problem, right? Which is a nonsensical way of viewing the world. As I said, there's no doubt about it that the Republican Party, for example, like here in Texas, is going to be very happy to be throwing people off of Medicaid, to be ending food stamps, extended food stamps for folks at the end of this this COVID funding expires, right? But to people in Texas, for example, in Hidalgo County, which voted overwhelmingly for Biden, do they deserve this? In Pennsylvania, where not only Biden won the presidential election, the Democrats were able to win the state house and the governorship. Do we get these kind of op-eds and tweet threads about how those people deserve the punishment for their ignorance? This is nothing new. My whole life, and Matt's yours too, right? We've been bumping around from human crisis to human crisis, avoidable anti-human crisis, because for the Democratic and the Republican Party in this country, working class people are expendable. And we're trying to build a politics that transcends these kind of silly geographical or regional divides that have sort of set up American politics for a long time. I mean, in America, when you don't have a working class party, right, you have to find things for people to hold on to, because while the Republicans and the Democrats don't care about working class voters, they have to find ways to build some kind of coalition so they can win elections, right? And what ends up, taking the place of that? Regionalism, urban versus rural, all these kind of things, and they play into it, right? These kind of distracting issues from the fundamental fight that we're all in. I bring this up to say that, like, there's people who are very easily, they look down on people who live in red areas of the country. And I just want to bring up the fact that the class war is everywhere, and you are out of your mind if you think that it's not in your region. The top 5 most unequal states in the country are New York, Louisiana, Connecticut, California, and Massachusetts, right? Only one of those states is one that might ring, a bell for you, Louisiana. They have a Democratic governor, not a good fellow, right? The point here is that inequality, the suffering of working people, is a universal experience in the United States of America. And if you're falling into this kind of false war, right, between the Democratic and the Republican Party, you're not doing your job as a socialist in recognizing that all across this country, working class people are one thrown to the wolves, but are left out of the political process, right? And don't forget that the largest cohort of people in this country are non-voters. I'm not trying to make this kind of stupid point that the two parties are the same, but at a certain point, I think that people trying to recognize that there is difference between the Democratic and the Republican Party has gotten people into this trap where they're not able to recognize that what fundamentally unites these two parties. It's a contempt for the working class and an affinity for the rich and powerful. Look no further than what's going on with the railroad industry in this country, right? Where Republicans and Democrats locked arms to block the railroad workers from going on strike. People who are making these demands not only on things like wages and scheduling, but that the fact is that the safety record in this industry is dangerous, and the workers understood this. And when they came to the government, both of these parties basically gave them the cold shoulder and turned lovingly into the arms of their very wealthy donors, the people who run those industries. That affinity, that unity from the ruling class in this country, that's the biggest threat to working people. The promise of building democratic socialists is not to just sit around and become junior partners of a political institution that is fundamentally hostile to working people. And Lord help us all. If that can't, if that doesn't get through to you, Lord help us. The least we can do is not fall into this trap of identifying people with these working people with these two anti-working class parties. You might think that someone is delusional if they thought Trump was going to wage war on the elites, right? But you were just as delusional if you believe Joe Biden when he said this campaign is about Scranton versus Park Avenue. We've had 2 years of seeing what that looks like. When in the first half of his term, he's been waging war on working class people, culminating, as I just mentioned, in blocking a strike where one of the major concerns led to the disaster in East Palestine. I'm going to bring this up really quick because the good folks at the Center for Working Class Politics have been doing a lot of incredible work on looking at what's going on with working class voters in this country. And you look at the polls in this country, and things like Medicare for all, higher $15 minimum wage, all these things are incredibly popular, right? We know that we actually have a majority in the sense of like what working people think and what working people want in this country. Well, the problem is that the vehicles to attain it are hostile to that. The Center for Working Class Politics put out this poll where they interviewed thousands of working class people, right, using a different metric than what is traditional to find people who are sort of left out of the coalition. And they found that working class voters, for example, prefer progressive candidates who focus primarily on bread and butter economic issues and who frame those issues in universal terms. Populist class-based progressive campaign messaging appeals to working class voters at least as well as mainstream Democratic messaging. Progressives do not need to surrender questions of social justice to win working class voters, but certain identity-focused rhetoric is a liability. Working class voters prefer working class candidates. Working class non-voters are not automatic progressives. Blue-collar workers are especially sensitive to candidate messaging and respond even more acutely to the differences between populist and, quote, woke language. And to do this, they basically set up different candidates with different talking points and different platforms, right? And they had a huge example of like different kinds of people, like somebody who might work for like a Wall Street financial corporation or somebody who's a small business owner, right? To see what kind of candidates resonated with people in areas that are swing states, in areas, for example, where Trump might have done well and maybe Biden won in 2020. Because if you're looking at politics on a national level, those are areas where there's a lot of questions that need to be answered if we want to start winning, right? And they found time and time again that talking about things like working class issues, talking about economics, talking about jobs, talking about these things that should be the basis of any kind of left, progressive, democratic socialist politics win, right? So the fact is that we have the ideas, we have to build community, we have to build capacity, and we have to build confidence in folks. And we're offering something that's very, very different from what the Democratic Party is offering. So this reflexive attitude that a lot of people have, where like, oh, well, this community, or this area might be hostile to the Democratic Party, therefore they are hostile to things like Medicare for all, is wrongheaded, and it's dangerous for trying to build the movements that we want to be building in this country. The promise of our politics is that we can do something different. But look, let's play some sound really quick that I think really highlights this point. And I want to shout out John Russell, who's been doing amazing work covering about what's happening in East Palestine. In East Palestine, and this is from the More Perfect Union. This is him talking to some folks in East Palestine who describe themselves as Trump voters, and just hear what they're saying about Trump, about the state of the nation, about what they would like to see happen.
When they blame a left side or a right side or this and back and forth, we're not
tired of
it's
that.
not about it's about our town now and people not being able to drink the water, about kids having rations. It's about this thing. That's what this is about.
Norfolk Southern. What do they really owe this community?
They owe this community a lot. They owe us property value. They owe us our health. They owe us 5-10 years from now when things are going on.
This company that's owned by J.P. Morgan, Vanguard, and BlackRock. Alan Shaw's a pawn.
So
He's a pawn. He makes $8 million a year. $8 million a year. He lives in an 8,000-foot square mansion. He doesn't care about the people.
They're going to make their money, man. The trains are going to roll no matter what. Whether we're here or not, we're just ants to them. Industrial accidents can be prevented. Every industrial accident that's ever happened in the country can be prevented. Preventative maintenance.
Trump in 2018, I get the policies. The policies weren't great. That's fine. And you know what? If Trump has to take a little bit of the blame, I'm good with that. But you know what? This administration has had the House, the Senate, the presidency for the last 2 years. They changed a lot of policies.
They imposed a contract and stopped the rail workers from striking. I mean, tell me a little bit. Do you feel like the rail workers should have struck?
Absolutely, they should have, because of what has happened.
If Donald Trump was in power right now, what kind of things would you expect him to do to make a situation like this right?
Well, it's not about what I would expect Donald Trump to do. It's about what I would expect the leader of our country to do. And if Donald Trump was here to do something, if he was the president, I would expect him to do the same thing that Biden would do, and that would be to come in here and fix up what needs to be fixed up.
We're not wealthy, we're not the top 1%, but
right.
We just want
we're not after for money, we're after for fixing so we can stay where we've lived forever.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, go ahead, man. I just think that really encapsulates like a lot of things that we've been trying to put forward on this program for the past couple of years.
This shouldn't be surprising to anybody. Like, this is the problem with, like, when MSNBC decides we're going to get to know a Trump voter, they're not finding these guys where they're basically saying the Democrats shouldn't have broken the strike. And, it's not necessarily about Trump, but like what the leader do. They're finding like the people who support, separating kids at the border or whatever like that. Right. But like this shouldn't be a surprise. And we talked about this with Luke Savage on the Sunday show. Like, Trump's appeal, it was all over the place, but the one that actually turns people out to him, I think, is like the stuff where he's like, people won't be dying on the street, or look at him now attacking DeSantis over he wants to cut your Medicare. Like, Trump understands this stuff, and that's why like the generic shit about Democrats versus Republicans, like, fucking prove it. Like those guys said, you had all this chance, and you recently just scored an own goal, if you want to call it that, last fucking month or 2 months ago. And yeah, I mean, it's just, that's it.
I mean, maybe it's just because it's just been my experience. Like, I'm a socialist because I think that we deserve better. I think that my neighbors deserve better. I think that my community deserves better. I'm also a socialist, not just out of critique, but out of like by the fact that I've been inspired by like the care and the solidarity and the well-reasoned manner that most people that I've come up around think about the world, even if they might vote for different presidential candidates, or even if they might do this or that. I've always recognized in my life that working people have a general understanding of the world around them. And we want a world where people who do the necessary labor to make society function aren't living in poverty. In fact, not just aren't living in poverty, are actually living great lives where not only are their needs met, but they're exceeded, right? That is like the thing that gets me up in the morning. That's the thing that has inspired me my entire life to fight for folks, right? And I've told stories before about like some of my early construction work experiences, seeing that kind of solidarity, people from different backgrounds coming together and saying, you know what, we're all on the same side here. The bosses are the ones who are fucking us over, and we're going to demand better for each other. Because not only am I here for you, I'm also doing it for me, right? Because like when you do better, I do better. And knowing that this like level of solidarity exists all across this country. And I just have to say it again, just because there's a segment sometimes of even unfortunately our audience that doesn't want to recognize that it happens in places that are quote unquote like red areas.